Hello everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you so much for joining me and welcome to a special countdown for thrash metal legends and one of the big four, Megadeth. So, despite there being constant lineup changes for these guys, they've actually been one of the most constant forces in not only metal and thrash metal, but also in music in general. And so with the release of their brand new album, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead, it just came out on September 2nd of 2022. If you haven't checked it out, do check it out. I thought it'd be fun to take a look back at their career, their entire catalog, and do a complete album ranking. So we're going to jump into that, all 16 studio albums by the band. But before we get into it, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please click the button. Also leave a comment, hit like. All those things help support my channel. I would greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by subscribing, you'll be able to stay up to date on all that's going on in the world of music, just like this, with a Megadeth album ranking, all 16 studio albums. And so, let's kick things off at number 16. This might be a surprise for some of you, but for me, coming in at number 16, and now before I do this, I want to say, in my opinion, there are no bad Megadeth albums. There's just ones I like better than the other ones. Coming in at number 16, Dystopia from 2016, their last studio album. It was their 15th studio album and first to feature who was new guitarist at that time, Kiko Loria from Angra. And it was actually the last one to feature original founding member and bassist David Ellefson. So drums on that one were not handled by a member of the band. It was actually handled by a guest drummer, Chris Adler of Lamb of God. So the album itself got a lot of critical praise, I think, because of that. New lineup, new guest drummer that came in from a major band, all of that. The album won a Grammy. So a lot of praise and everything, but for me at least, the album itself feels boring and uninspired. And it's just one of my least favorite ones that I go back to. Now, I will say that the title track, Dystopia, is one of my all-time favorite songs by the band. But one song is not enough to carry the entire thing. I just wish there was more of that variety on the album. I didn't find it, for me at least. Moving on to number 15, The System Has Failed from 2004, 10th studio album when it came out. This one here was actually intended to be a Dave Mustaine solo album, and I think that's partly why the album feels the way that it feels. It was recorded with session musicians. Now, interestingly, it actually features the return of guitarist Chris Poland from the original lineup. He did come in, though, just to play solos on it as a hired hand. He was not a member, even though the album ultimately turned into a Megadeth album. He did not stay, he did not rejoin. And so for me, the album itself just doesn't quite have the bite and feel of Megadeth album that I would expect. It's a good album, it's a solid album, but it really probably should have remained a Dave Mustaine solo album. But then again, aren't they all? Because, he's the only constant throughout. All right, now for a lot of people, this one here might be the number 16, the one in last place. But for me, I feel there's still a lot of good quality on this one. So 14 is Risk from 1999, 8th studio album. First to feature new drummer Jimmy DeGrazzo on it. Last to feature guitarist Marty Friedman. A little sad about that. Love him, wish he would come back. But this one here was a real experimental album that was intended to merge the modern day sounds of the time, things like samples, drum loops, all that kind of stuff. More radio friendly than the previous three albums, but it just really didn't work here. Some of the songs are really strong, but you had songs like Enter the Arena and Crush 'Em that was just blatant trying to write the song that would be an arena hit kind of a thing, and it just didn't work in my opinion. Now, interestingly, if you didn't like all those drum loops and samples and things on it, he removes it or buries most of it in the remix that came out as a remastered edition years later. So this one here actually helps boost this one up because I like this one a lot better than I like this one. Still, both are pretty good albums. That's why they're coming in at number 14 for me. Next up, coming in at number 13, Super Collider from 2013. Good solid album, 14th studio album. It was the final album to feature Sean Drover on drums and Chris Broderick on guitars. For me, at least, the album itself leans a little too much towards the radio-friendly sound instead of the thrash metal sound that we know and love. There were some good songs on it. I like it, but it just didn't quite kick over into that level that I need from Megadeth. Coming in at number 12, we've got 13. No, it did not come in at 13th place, even though it is the 13th studio album. Probably would have made more sense falling in there, but I think it was one step higher than that. Featured the return of founding member and bassist David Ellefson after having been out for a number of years. What I found interesting about this album here was that it features a number of older songs and outtakes that he recorded, redid, whatever you want to call it, reworked, I guess is the right term. Sudden Death, it was from Guitar Hero, and then you got these older outtakes that actually would later turn up on the reissues that they did when they came with some of the bonus tracks like New World Order, Black Swan, Millennium of the Blind. So I knew some of those songs from different things. So when you're getting 4 songs like that, plus some other stuff built around it, it never felt like a fully brand new album, even though it was totally intended to be that. But I felt like I was getting an odds and sods kind of an album. And unfortunately, I think that just held it back a bit for me, and is why it's not seen as a greater album, at least in my eyes. Coming in at number 11, we got the brand new one, The Sick, the Dying, and the Dead. 2022 release just came out, as I stated at the beginning of this, September 2nd. 16th studio album, and first to feature their new drummer, Dirk Van Buren from Soilwork. He does a great job here. And even though we've got James Lomenzo listed inside here as a member and photographed and everything, he doesn't actually play on the album. Bass duties, in fact, were handled by Steve DiGiorgio, who has played with Death, Testament, and a number of other bands. He does a great job. Not sure why he didn't come on full, board kind of a thing. Maybe he wasn't offered it. I don't know. It is nice, though, to have returning member James Lomenzo. I've always found it really interesting that he started off with White Lion, but he ends up with Megadeth, 2 bands that wouldn't have gotten along back in the day, but here he is. So good for him. Kudos for him. Good album. Do like it a lot. I've done a full review of it. In fact, I'm going to leave a link in the description if you want to know more about this brand new album. There's a lot of stuff that pulled me in that I like a lot better than Dystopia. So just as a counterpoint there from what I felt on the last album versus this album here. All right, now we're getting into some classic stuff. Number 10, Killing Is My Business, Business Is Good, 1985 debut studio album. The album itself was actually recorded on a budget of $8,000, but rumor is they actually only spent $4,000 of it recording the album, firing the producer, and producing it themselves. So if you've ever felt like me that this just has poor production quality and is not really up to the standards of what a Megadeth album is, good songs and stuff, but the overall production of the album, for me at least, is what's holding it back. So knowing that about it, that kind of explains it for me. That he's done a number of remixes and things to the album itself. It's never really quite polished it off the way it should be. I think that's also partly to the song structure and so forth. They're just not quite coming into their own just yet. We're going to have that happen a little later on. Coming in at number 9, So Far, So Good, So What, from 1988, third studio album. First and only album with guitarist Jeff Young. Kind of always wondered why he's never really done anything thereafter. He's never really formed any bands or gone out and done the thrash thing and so forth. Kind of an interesting that he hasn't, but he's done other stuff. He's constantly recording stuff and releasing stuff, but just not in the thrash vein. And so for me, at least, this album here feels a bit hasty and underdeveloped. It was coming off of writing the coattails from Peace Sells But Who's Buying, and it just doesn't feel anywhere nearly as developed and intense as that album is, in my opinion, which is why it falls in at number 7. All right, so coming in number 8, we've got The World Needs a Hero from 2001. Ninth studio album, really good album in my opinion. It didn't lean much more towards the radio-friendly stuff that they've been doing in the 90s there. First album to feature guitarist Al Pitrelli. Great guy, underutilized musician out there in the metal and thrash world, and he dips his hand every so often in it, and it's just phenomenal when he does, and I like that. Last one to feature drummer Jimmy DeGrazzo, and there would be a temporary breakup of the band after this one, which too is unfortunate because I think this lineup had a really good album in it that just quite hadn't come out yet. This was the start of it, and we never quite got to that point there. Coming in at number 7, we've got United Abominations, 2007, 11th studio album, and this one was an interesting one because coming off of The System Has Failed, which was really, as I said, intended to be a solo album recorded with session players, this was the first one that was a band effort, but it was an entirely new band. So we had Glenn Drover on guitars. He would eventually leave midway through the tour, so he didn't last very long. We got his brother, Sean Drover, on drums, who'd stick around a bit longer, and James Lemenzo has stuck around very long time until he stepped aside to let David Ellefson, founding member, return for a brief period, although he's now back in the band too, so that's cool. But we had a new lineup here, and this one was a good album after the previous one that I kind of felt lacked in terms of what makes a quality Megadeth album, that pacing, that variety of material and so forth. On it, we didn't really get that on the previous one. I sort of felt like that was a more homogeneous sounding album. This one here really stepped it up a notch, which is why it's coming in at number 7 for me. Number 6, Ingame from 2009. This one here, modern day classic in my opinion. I love this album. 12th studio album, was the first to feature their new guitarist at the time, Chris Broderick, and it was the last one to feature bassist James Lemenzo, who, as I mentioned, stepped aside for David Ellefson to return. Blistering instrumental opener on this thing that set this album off right. I've felt ever since this point that they need to do more of that, just open with a full-on shred instrumental song that barrels right into the next track. It was just done so well on this album here, and after that it just kept hammering one right after the other. Really great tracks on here. Coming in at number 5, Cryptic Writings from 1997, 7th studio album, certified gold. Band has actually done a number of platinum, gold, and even a double platinum album. I'm going to call them out as we go forward on it because we're now into that phase of this point of the countdown. Last album to feature the most stable lineup, Marty Friedman on guitar and Nick Menza on drums. And I do think the breakdown of that is what has affected future albums and why they don't rank nearly as high as this. When you get a band together that actually functions as a band, writes as a band, and so forth, I think you get far greater momentum and appeal out of it. And just, again, my opinion on this. But this one here, though, took a much more simplified sound to a new level. They had been, tussling with that on the 2 previous albums, Countdown to Extinction from 1992 and Euthanasia in 1994. So this one here leaned much more towards rock than metal. And so that's the only reason really holding this one back. I still like where they ventured with this. That was just part of the 90s era. And I think Megadeth was one of the best bands that was able to do that, better even than some of the other unnamed, let's call them unnamed bands out there, but we know who we're talking about. So I think Megadeth did a brilliant job with that. Now, one of my personal favorites out of all of this, number 4, Euthanasia, 1994. 6th studio album, certified platinum, and in 1994 to have a platinum album by a metal band was a big deal. Continued much the way that the previous album, Countdown to Extinction from 1992 had, but this one here I think did it much better. I love Countdown to Extinction, but as an album I return to more and more, it's this one right here. This one here took that to the right amount of level. Now I say that, but yet I'm actually still going to go ahead and rank, coming in at number 3, Countdown to Extinction a bit higher. 1992, 5th studio album. It's their highest charting and most successful album. This is the one that went double platinum, and it featured that new, brand new, simplified sound at the time. It was their version of the Black Album. Although I don't think they made it because of that. I think a lot of metal bands were already moving in that direction at that time. It's just what was going on within the music industry and so forth. This one here, though, is the pinnacle of that, where every song on here was radio friendly, simplified, shortened, and it was just like a bullet being shot. Each one of these things was amazing, the way that it was crafted and came out, and that is why I'm placing that just a notch above Euthanasia, which I really, really love. Coming in at number 2, how can it not be? Peace Sells, But Who's Buying, 1986. Probably number 1 for a lot of you, but it's coming in at number 2 for me. 2nd studio album, certified platinum. Last one to feature guitarist Chris Poland, who's amazing. I wish he would do more in the metal world. You got Damn the Machine. If you're not familiar with that, check that out. His solo album, a lot of good stuff on those. But until his return with the system has failed in 2004, great to have him soloing, but I would really like him and Dave to collaborate on an album. I think that'd be a lot of good. So while this one's not as big a seller as 1992's Countdown to Extinction, for me it is their most classic, iconic album. Every track that's on here, the sound that's on here, if I was to tell somebody to go out and start with a Megadeth album, it would be this. It would not actually be Countdown to Extinction, even though that's the bigger one. That's not their true classic sound. They may have reached higher heights on it, but I think this is the one that if you want to turn somebody on to Megadeth, that's the one to start with there. Okay, but my personal favorite, and the one that I think is their #1 album, topping even that classic, Rust in Peace from 1990, fourth studio album, certified platinum, featuring at the time brand new members Nick Menza on drums and Marty Friedman on guitar. And I think that's the reason that the album, it was just something special about Dave Mustaine, David Ellison coming in with these two new guys, Nick Menza, Marty Friedman, and the fire that shot out of these guys when they came together. It's this album right here. This thing is explosive. It is brutal. Arguably their heaviest and fastest album right there, hands down. I love that thing. It's like Slayer's Seasons in the Abyss. I don't know, just phenomenal in my opinion. And there you go. That is the 16 album countdown ranking for Megadeth. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I'm sure you've got your opinions on what should have been what, and I'm sure you're freaking out right now that I didn't place something where you might have placed it, and that's okay. We've all got our opinions. Go ahead and leave your comments on it. Give me your rankings. That's all good. All right, everyone, take care. Have a good one. Go out and check these albums out. And if you haven't listened to the brand new album or you're on the fence, check the link below for my full review of the brand new one, The Sick, The Dying, and The Dead. Take care, everyone.